This video is about the history of forensic science, part 2, and in this video we'll cover the crime laboratory and all its divisions, the rise in the number of crime labs, and important cases. I'm most likely going to break this video up into 2 different sections so that it'll be shorter for you to review. And I may also put it into Edpuzzle so that you can answer the questions in Edpuzzle. So, forensics investigations and forensics evidence are 2 different concepts. Forensic investigation is actually the use of science and technology in the investigation of criminal proceedings. And forensic evidence is actually the information that you find by using scientific methods. So they're very different, but they're both very important in solving crimes. How did the crime laboratory system develop? What science and technology is used? And how do we get the evidence? Will be covered in the next few slides. So the oldest crime lab in the United States is the Los Angeles Police Department Crime Lab, which was established in 1923 by August Vollmer, who was the chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. Then in 1932, the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, created its own crime laboratory. The FBI was influenced by the work of Colonel Calvin Goddard at the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory at Northwestern University in Chicago. The application of science to criminal investigations had become a priority at this point. And the FBI Crime Lab is the largest crime laboratory in the world, and it's located in Quantico, Virginia. The FBI Crime Lab has many divisions and a lot of people working for it. It has a biometric analysis lab or section which has DNA analysis, latent fingerprint analysis. It has a forensic response group that does crime scene documentation, evidence response, hazardous evidence response, photographic operations, scientific response and analysis, and technical hazards response. It has a scientific analysis division that does chemistry, counterterrorism, and forensic science, cryptanalysis and racketeering, firearms and tool marks, question documents, and trace evidence. And in addition, it has other resources for people to use. Here, if you look at the slideshow, you'll be able to click on this link, which shows the Forensic Services Handbook. Additional developments before 1960 were, in 1950, the American Academy of Forensic Science, AAFS, was formed in Chicago, Illinois. The group also began publication of the Journal of Forensic Science, which is a very important journal. In 1953, Paul L. Kirk published Crime Investigation, one of the first comprehensive criminalistics and crime investigation texts that encompass theory in addition to practice. Kirk was a biochemist, microscopist, and expert on blood spatter analysis. He also worked on the famous Sam Shepard case where they made a movie called The Fugitive. He was a biochemistry professor at UC Berkeley and then led the criminalistics program there. Some interesting information. Kirk was instrumental in getting Sam Shepard's conviction thrown out and acquittal at retrial, while a senior member of the AAFS, and he was a prosecution expert, but he was denied admittance to the AAFS. But, however, the most prestigious award of the AAFS criminalistic section is called the Paul L. Kirk Award, even though he wasn't allowed admittance to the organization. In 1954, R.F. Borkenstein, who was a captain in the Indiana State Police, invented the breathalyzer. We talked about the American Academy of Forensic Science, American The American Academy of Forensic Science has 11 sections and was created in 1950. Those sections are criminalistics, digital and multimedia sciences, engineering sciences, general, jurisprudence, odontology, pathology and biology, physical anthropology, psychiatry and behavioral science, question documents, and toxicology. More specifically, divisions of forensic science are forensic chemistry, which handles drug sample identification, poisons, and drug synthesis. Toxicology, which handles metabolite identification, drugs, steroids, and tissue samples. Trace evidence, which looks at hair, fibers, paints, residues, and soils. DNA sequencing, which can come from hair, urine, blood, tissue, tooth, or skin cells. Firearms, which includes shell casings, primer markings, barrel markings, and tool markings. Latent prints, which includes both fingerprints and palm prints. Question documents and digital evidence are other divisions. And these things actually we're going to probably repeat myself again. Evidence falls into two main categories: identification and classification, which used to identify a class of substance, like identify the drug or the body fluid or whatever the trace is. Also, the second category is actual origin, common origin. So it's a more precise conclusion in which the examiner can determine specifically where something originated from and match it to an individual person, place, or crime. How evidence is used through reconstruction or corroboration. So it's used to aid in the development of a hypothesis. The order of events can be determined, or the relative position of people at a crime scene, or how the crime unfolded. And the evidence can also give you a negative identification. In other words, could disprove a hypothesis or have non-match or exclude a suspect or be completely inconclusive. A crime laboratory is a specific type of laboratory that includes a specific, at least one full-time natural scientist that examines physical evidence in crime matters and provides test reports and opinion testimony. So the crime laboratory is a scientific laboratory with at least one full-time natural scientist that examines physical evidence in criminal matters and provides test reports and opinion testimony with respect to such physical evidence in courts of law. An example in New York State would be the Division of Criminal Justice Services. A crime lab does not include operations that engage exclusively in fingerprint recovery, development, and examination, crime scene investigation, computer crime inquiries, and photography. So the New York State Identification Bureau is not considered a crime lab. The New York State Crime Lab has the largest multidisciplinary laboratory, is the New York Police Department Crime Lab located in Jamaica, New York. The largest public DNA laboratory in the United States is the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, located in Manhattan, New York. And at this time, it says over 160 scientists, supervisors, and managers. I looked on the website, and I think there's over 200 now. There are, in 2014, 411 government crime labs in the United States, 4.1 million requests for forensic services, and a backlog of over 1 million requests. Crime lab departments include, and we've gone over some of this before, analytical, scientific testing such as DNA, toxicology, controlled substances, and serology, and the labs thereof. So the example here is cocaine recovered from a cartel. Specialized forensic services include forensic odontology, forensic pathology, forensic anthropology, forensic entomology, digital evidence, and forensic engineering. Pattern and trace evidence includes things like firearms and tool marks, bite marks, impressions like footwear or tires, bloodstain patterns, and hair. For example, forensic psychiatry examines the relationship between human behavior and legal proceedings, such as competency to stand trial. Forensic odontology involves using teeth to provide information about the identification of victims when the body is left in an unrecognizable state. Also, it would investigate any bite marks on people or other things. Forensic engineering is concerned with failure analysis like structures, buildings, etc., accident reconstruction, and causes and origins of fires or explosions. Forensic computer and digital analysis unit examines digital evidence like laptops and cell phones. Forensic pathology is concerned with determining the cause of death. Forensic anthropology examines skeletal remains, bones, for law enforcement purposes. The toxicology unit examines body fluids and organs for the presence of drugs and poisons. Some crime labs have their own toxicology unit, but many are distinct entities from crime labs, such as the health department. One example is the case of Ann Miller Kontz, who poisoned her husband with arsenic, and that was determined in the toxicology unit. Another unit is the latent fingerprints unit, which processes and examines evidence for latent fingerprints. And an example is John Alleman Jr., who was stabbed to death, and the person who killed him was only found like 30 years later through an unprocessed fingerprint that they decided to reprocess many, many years afterwards. And through that, they found the perpetrator. The polygraph unit conducts polygraph or lie detector tests. Voice print analysis unit attempts to tie a recorded voice to a particular subject. The crime scene investigation unit dispatches specially trained personnel to the crime scene to collect and preserve physical evidence. So here are some of the questions that you need to answer. What is the largest crime lab in the world? You can answer it either on a Google Doc or however you want to. So question 1, what is the largest crime lab in the world? Question 2, what are the evidence categories? These are all multiple choice right now. Question 3, can evidence be used to prove a hypothesis false? Question 4, what is one of the tasks that a toxicology lab does?